So this is officially take two. And again, I'm gonna leave a little bit in here for the patrons, just because it remains to be seen as to whether or not I'm actually gonna show up on next episode. Which, as far as I know, we have the book club scheduled for this Thursday. Like I said, I'm not sure that I'm actually gonna do it though, so we'll see. But I did want to just take a minute here and just talk to you guys, sort of fill you in, give you a little bit of an update. So I don't know if I had mentioned this in the last bro hang or anything, but June 15th, we have the hearing to for the termination of the biological parental rights for Byron. So after that, we can schedule the hearing to actually adopt him. Then um, yeah, as far as I don't know how much I had sort of talked about like with the car stuff, but basically at one point in time, both of our cars went down. So initially, the Nissan went down, uh, and the TLDR on that is that we replaced the fuel pump, or my dad replaced the fuel pump, and I paid for it. Um, but apparently the fuel pump he put in was no good, so we took it back to the garage. They tried everything else except for the fuel pump because it was brand new. It turns out it was a bad fuel pump. So we got gigged for that, and right now, and I have a receipt, and we're going to take back the other fuel pump. And hopefully get our money back there. So, but right now, as it stands, I'm about $1,200 in on the Nissan, and with the Jeep, so the Jeep, the other day, the ignition switch in like went down, and yeah, so that actually got taken care of fairly quickly. It put me out about $350. So right now we have two vehicles that run, praise God. Uh, but we're also kind of in a situation where we're thinking about just trading them both in while they're running and seeing if we can get like, a few grand knocked off of something, hopefully a little more reliable and get a half decent payment. Because we do have basically my sister is for the cost of basically a title transfer. They have an older car that which I think is in supposed to be in pretty decent condition. So yeah, that's happy, joy, kind of stuff. So yeah, that's just kind of been whatever. You know, Sort of doubling back to the Byron front, we are like a little frustrated, and if you guys could just be praying for Megan and I, we we're sort of starting to, and this is not like a call for help or anything, but we're starting to run low on sort of like the war funds, for the adoption stuff. And we've gotten a couple, like there have been some bills from our lawyer that frankly, and maybe we were just spoiled because halfway, back in December, our first lawyer, she left because she's actually running for district judge. Um, and she was great. Always answered our questions, sort of kept us in the loop on stuff. Didn't whack us for a whole bunch of, if she shot us a message, of course she'd bill us, but it was never like super extravagant. The lawyer that took over our case has and she's I guess she's coming into the firm, and so there's sort of like catching up and everything else, but like that process, she has not communicated well with us. um, at one point in time, we got a bill for $700 for basically two um, private, like they use a messaging service, like basically text messages or short form emails, like like short paragraphs, and we got billed for $700 for that. Um, and so I was, and then we just got billed for $1,300, and there was a whole bunch of stuff where, and again, I think the biggest thing is we have not been communicated with at all, very well. And like I get it, lawyers and paralegals are expensive, but then we also just found out that the lawyer who's been handling our case isn't actually handling our case because she has a scheduling conflict that day, and somebody else is going to be taking care of it. And again, it's like we have not been kept in the loop in any of that. And so you guys know me. I'm perfectly even keeled, and never just kind of. I've been a, a mess of stress, a stress mess. Um, the last couple of days with this stuff, and then to put an even finer cap. And again, guys, like this is just sort of like these are things that you can be thinking about and praying for me and Megan. I had to take off today, and I had actually recorded this last night, but again, this is a second take. Um, but I was kind of tired and it was a little scattered and I was a little fried. So I wanted to double back and redo this again. But Yuki, I used a personal day to take Yuki to the vet because we noticed that she was like limping and not just a little, like a lot. Like she was not carrying any weight on her phone or not phone on her foot. And so took her to the vet and it's not bad for now. It's kind of like we got some anti-inflammatory stuff to sort of help some swelling, but the doctor is concerned that it could be a cruciate injury, which is basically it's like the ACL in a human. Um, so that's super fun. For now, we so the next couple of days, and for now we just got to kind of keep her chill and not whatever. So yeah, that's been yeah, it's just been a crazy couple of weeks. We are both, I think, a little nervous. And I don't know if I've shared this before, but Biomom, we found out some stuff about Biomom, and this is sort of a Brohang exclusive that um, she had actually tried to keep the Byron, um, but her grandmother and her mother told her that they weren't going to help her raise him. Um, and there's some stuff with Biodad that is kind of concerning. And it's just like some of the stuff is like, we're really a little nervous that this sort of far into it, uh, we're really hoping that Dakota won't sort of back out and take him back. Um, yeah, and I know that's a little whatever, but if you guys could be praying for us in that regard, that would be really helpful. For whatever reason, I think, you know, we've both been kind of like just feeling that. And again, that could just be sort of like the stress of the situation, sort of like nerves, you know, and I don't want to over, but it could just be sort of a spiritual attack where we're just, you know, and I think like the answer needs to be like, you know, we need to cast all our cares on the Lord. But if you guys could sort of join alongside us in prayer for that, I would really, really appreciate it. Uh, it's just been the last 6 months has been so up and down with all of it that yeah, and even why I'm sort of like up in the air with this book club episode because full disclosure, I didn't play through Majora's Mask. I tried to a couple times and I just couldn't get into it for whatever reason. And yeah, um, that was, you know, and honestly, if I'm being honest, I just don't think the game, I think it's a really interesting game, but I just don't, I'm not sure that it holds up. Uh, you guys are getting a little bit of a spoiler on what my take would be is frankly, I think it's a really interesting game with some really cool ideas. I like it as sort of a Legend of Zelda side story, but ultimately I just think it's one of those games that doesn't hold up. I think it's one of the most interesting ideas in a Legend of Zelda title. um, I just think frankly it's sort of the design is kind of old, and this is somebody who hasn't gone back through and played all that, you know, more than a few hours. um it felt a little cumbersome. I think back in the day it felt fresh and kind of different and wild, um but now it's kind of like yeah. So I don't think it aged well. So there's that. But yeah, uh it's just kind of been weird. Just a lot of weird lately. Anyways, So I'm gonna start here at the 10-minute mark, Josh. I'm just gonna start the regular. Hey guys, it's Nate, and it's time for another bite sized. So last episode, Josh and I did a grab bag, and we each brought a topic to sort of discuss. And one of the thing that I brought was the kind of funny interview with Phil Spencer. And I think even in that episode, I disclosed the fact that I hadn't listened to the episode or watched the episode in its entirety. And I was sort of acting off of sound bites, but I thought there were a few interesting sound clips that we could sort of, play around with and sort of riff off of. And I think the one that we really hit was the Microsoft not being able to out console uh, Sony and Nintendo, and I don't think that Josh and I were too hard, but we did feel like that was a bit of a cop out. I still feel like that's a bit of a cop out, um, but after listening to the interview in its entirety, I did have some follow up thoughts, and then sort of something even sort of spinning off of that I've kind of been thinking about as well, and I figure it's sort of tangential. So first off, let me double back on the Phil Spencer episode or interview. First off, mad props to Phil. I don't always like him that well, and that's not true. I like him, but he also kind of puts off a not a phony vibe, um, but he's just kind of I don't know. He's like the cool uncle, but the cool uncle, he's not like a Nate McKeever cool uncle. Nate McKeever cool uncle is cool all the time. You ask any of my nieces and nephews, I'm cool all the time. I'm never not cool. But there's some, anyways. It's just a, sort of like there's something about that just kind of like there's a lot of things I actually like about Phil Spencer, but sometimes he just kind of rubs me the wrong way, and I don't know what exactly that is. Like I can't, but it's not because he's not authentic, because I think very much so in this most recent that interview with Kind of Funny, I think we saw like a lot of just like we saw sort of his heart on his sleeve, and he was really dissatisfied and sort of frustrated with Microsoft's turnout and sort of Redfall and everything else. And that was actually pretty refreshing because, frankly, to me, that's kind of where they should have been for a while. Like Xbox's performance, and Phil confirmed this more or less. Xbox's performance over the last couple of years has been middling. Yes, they had a really good year, but overall, like there's been a lot of like wait and see, wait and see, wait and see, and people have been waiting, and what we've been seeing has not been good. Um, and I think, especially given the fact that the CMA has basically, the UK has basically kind of like poo-pooed the ABK Microsoft merger acquisition, and all of that stuff has yet to play out. Well, and just recently, the European Commission approved it. So that's an interesting. We'll see how that all sorts of shakes out. That all of that shakes out. But just coming off the CMA stuff, coming off the Redfall review, he goes on the Kind of Funny, and he didn't have to keep that interview. Like he could have bounced out. He could have said I can't do this right now. But he went. He showed up. They had that established for a while. So he showed up, and it's like anytime somebody does the hard thing and steps into the hard situation. And I think that's what Phil was doing in a lot of ways. And I think he knew that's what he was doing in a lot of ways. I have to give props. You get like that is like totally a legit move in the sense that I'm saying like, that's cool. And he gets a little bit of respect and a little bit of admiration for doing that, because it's like it would have been so easy for him to just say now is not the time, but he went in. And in addition, I've got to give the Kind of Funny Xbox team some credit and some flowers too, because I feel like they could have come off a little heavier. Gary Whitta especially was kind of like asked some really poignant questions, and I thought Phil had some good responses to them, but they could have softballed that. They could have like played nice, but they kind of held Phil's feet to the fire and Xbox's feet to the fire, which maybe not as much as I'd like, but I think they've done that more than I think most people on the Xbox enthusiast community have done so far. With the rare exception being, like, I think Maddie and Cog over at Defining Duke do an okay job. Even I feel like they're kind of soft on Microsoft sometimes, especially given the sort of just the abysmal performance over the last year. And that's not me just saying that. That's actually Phil sort of copped to that. There's a lot of promises made and they weren't kept. And he kind of, I think Gary Whitta's question about, like, well, what is Microsoft learning? What are you guys basically saying? What are you guys going to do? Like, you guys have kind of pooped the bed a few times here. What are you going to do? And Phil's answers were encouraging, but at the same time, and I think that the part that was the most encouraging is that Phil and sort of like gave me sort of like reason to want to, like, give me a reason to sort of want to give them a second, third, fourth chance, like to really sort of like be actually curious about what they're doing. Is that Phil basically said, he was like, hey, we know that we've kind of like, just for lack of, we've just screwed everything up. We have lost a lot of trust. We've sort of abused a lot of that trust. And again, I'm paraphrasing. I'm not really, I'm synthesizing here. I'm not really quoting him, but he said, like, that Microsoft needs to earn that back, and that he can say whatever he wants. They can show whatever they want at this showcase that they've got coming out soon. But until people have the games in hand, until they're playing them, until they're interacting with them, it's all talk. And he said, we have to prove it to you. And to me, that was a major step forward. Again, like, I just wanted to give him credit for sort of taking. And I think overall, the interview was maybe a little more positive than I thought. I still think that part of the problem is that Xbox doesn't have much of a corporate personality. They don't really know what they're doing, or what they know that Game Pass is sort of like their future, but I don't think that they have really a great path forward with it right now. And I'll double back on that a little bit here. But all that being said, like, and if it sounded like we were sort of maybe too heavy-handed or whatever, it does still sort of feel like, in a lot of ways, well, we can't out console Nintendo or Sony. That does still feel like a cop out, because if I'm being honest, I think, like, the thing is, like, I'm kind of like, well, you guys you haven't been competitive at all. Your output hasn't been at all. Like, and he even at one point in time, he said, Nintendo and Sony are making deals that make it hard for us. And it's like, well, okay, but like, you guys should be making your own deals. And honestly, there's a part of me, it's like, you're a subsidiary of Microsoft. You have a way bigger war chest than either one of these companies. And so maybe the answer isn't sort of doing all the other things you've been doing, and it's just like doubling down on production and making solid experiences, which again is something that hopefully, we're going to start seeing some of that. So we'll see how that shakes out. And again, I don't think he's wrong in saying that, like, even if Starfield comes out and it's even better than Tears of the Kingdom, which is coming out as maybe arguably one of the greatest games of all time. And again, like, hype beast say what kind of thing. It's an issue where, like, people aren't just going to get rid of their Xbox or their PlayStation or their Switch to play Starfield. He's right. That for the average consumer, yeah, that's just not going to happen. But I think the problem is there aren't a ton of reasons to be on Xbox, period. But and hopefully that's going to change. And I think some of that's even changing for me, some of my perspective, since I got the new laptop, and I've got the 3 month sub to Game Pass Ultimate. I'm playing around with it, and it's kind of been interesting, which basically kind of like this all sort of pushes towards, all of this being said, like, some of that interview, just like some of what Josh and I said still stands, is that I don't think this is the end for Xbox, but this is, I think, a bit of a crisis point, and we're really going to see, this is maybe not an absolute make or break moment, but it does feel like this is sort of like this could very much be like the Wii U into Switch moment for Xbox. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe not that drastic. Maybe not that sort of dramatic. And I definitely do think like there is room for somebody in the upper echelon of Xbox gaming to probably lose their position. Again, I'm not advocating for that. I'm not calling for anyone to lose their job, but it does seem like there's just some overall mismanagement there, which kind of leads me into the back half here. Um, so I've been playing it like Game Pass. I've had PS Plus Extra for a while, and recently I had the opportunity to listen to a Sacred Symbols Plus episode, which is the patron only Sacred Symbols extras with David Jaffe and Colin talking about Game Pass and some of the pros and cons. And Jaffe is very much sort of almost an apologist for Game Pass, where Colin has been pretty adversarial. And I think the one thing that just has to be said, right? And I hate saying it and I kind of make fun of it, but Game Pass arguably is one of the best deals in gaming. I think that if I'm being honest, I think um, PlayStation Plus Extra is comparable. Yeah, you don't have the day one drops the way that Game Pass does, but I think if you look at the library, the volume, and the quality, there's an argument to be made that PlayStation Plus Extra is at least competitive um, in that sphere to a certain extent. So I think just sort of expanding that, these streaming subscription services, whatever kind of this model is, like the Game Pass type model, is a great value just overall. As if you're looking at just the idea of just sort of things being, I'm going to up this a little bit, things kind of being uh, if it's all about sort of quantity and and quality. So we want both of those things out of these services. Anyways, doubling back, sort of like circling back around to the Jaffe Colin interview, there were a couple thoughts that I had in that I kind of agreed with. And David Jaffe is one of those guys that like I have mixed feelings on it. I think he's arguably has some really interesting insight into the games industry. I also think he smokes entirely too much weed and is kind of a little. Um, he kind of puts off that like smartest guy in the room energy, and maybe the reason I notice that is because I probably put that off too. Um, and I just think some of his takes are not great in other areas. But this is an area where I definitely sort of agree with him in the sense that um, I've had to come around on this. Just because the execution of Game Pass has not been great doesn't delegitimize um, the actual idea behind it. And that's where I can kind of co-sign, because I think the biggest problem is that Microsoft has mismanaged that. I do think I think Microsoft has mismanaged Game Pass in several critical and key ways. And one of the reasons they're really struggling to find a bit of a foothold with it is like, and I know that they had to do this, but I think the biggest sort of blunder or mistake they made was the day and date. Any Microsoft first party stuff is free on Game Pass. I, for the amount of money, like God of War, we know was like a $200 million game or something like that. It was wildly expensive. I think Shuhei Yoshida leaked the production costs on that, and they made a ton of money on that just on single sales. And I think the fact that is in a lot of these first party micro, so all of the Bethesda, all of these acquired studios, anything that those studios makes is like that's money lost. And so I just think like in a lot of ways Game Pass is going to hemorrhage money because of those costs, and any acquisitions, like any deals that they have to sign to acquire like day one stuff, that's money that's going to be lost. And some of that is like, money in, money out kind of, you got to spend money to make money. But I do think that it's an unnecessary kind of burden on that service, because unless it's the whole like, and especially since it seems that games is the game subscription services are starting to plateau. So it's, again, there's going to be a price hike and all that stuff. So I definitely think that that's a bit of a problem for Microsoft, um, in some ways. I also think that they just have, there's sort of a lack of really knowing what Game Pass is or should be, and just what these subservices should be. And again, this is something that Colin and Jaffe talked about, and this is even sort of what I found in sort of exploring it and playing around with these services. I found that the way that they best work for me, and I think that they will best work for most people, not all people. I think some people, will use them differently, but there's like three or four primary uses for me. So one is just, I think one of the things that I'm noticing is that when I'm checking out stuff on Game Pass or PS Plus Extra, it's because I'm curious about the title, but I'm not sure I want to actually commit like the $20. And so Game Pass and PS Plus Extra, these game subservices have become sort of a test bed, almost like an extended sort of demo service for me, where it's I get to play this out, I get to play as much as I want of it, and then I can make the decision whether or not I actually want to like sort of spring for it or not. Because I am much more of a like, I like to just buy and own my stuff, and so it kind of gives me a risk-free opportunity to try this stuff out and play with it. Um, and so that's sort of, I think, one of the primary uses is that I can check stuff out, and there's literally no risk to me financially because I'm already paying for the sub, and if I don't like it, it's not that big a deal. I can just sort of, I don't have to worry about returning it. I just stop playing it. I pull it off my library. I stop playing it. It's fine. I think sort of going like seeing what sort of exclusive deals each one of them will work out with Game Pass Ultimate. They have the EA bundle is sort of included, whereas with PS Plus Extra, or maybe it's Premium, you get the Ubisoft sort of library collection stuff added. So I think that's interesting, where it's sort of, it gives you these potentially exclusive free, included with the price of subscription, like opportunities. So that's kind of interesting as well. Um, Not a major sort of thing. I think the other thing too is just exposure. One of the coolest ways that I think Game Pass and PS Plus Extra, Premium, whatever, these sub services, we've got to find these Game Pass type models. I think the one of the coolest things I've seen is just the exposure to properties that I didn't know existed. Period. We're seeing a lot of like really kind of interesting indie and smaller titles get some exposure and actually get out there just in the market. Period. I think that's cool. I mean, I can't remember if like, I'm pretty sure Cult of the Lamb was on Game Pass at one point in time, and it's more of a title, Series SX and Game Pass exclusive, period. But Hi-Fi Rush, things like that, where these smaller, more sort of like premium indie experiences, and maybe Hi-Fi Rush isn't really indie, I don't know, but these smaller indie titles like Spiritfarer, is, I think, was on Game Pass, and I think it's on PS Plus Express Extra. It's on the PlayStation stuff now, and I hate talking about this. Is just like, it's so confusing. But I think it's on PlayStation right now, their service, and I think it was on Game Pass. I'm not 100% sure. There's a Chained Echoes is on Game Pass, and so there's a lot of these smaller kind of like experiences that are just getting a little more exposure, and people can play with them and experience them without having, and again, it's sort of riffing on that first idea where it's like they can play with them without having to dump money, and then if you like it, you can go ahead and buy it on whatever platform you want to play it on. And I think just that, as I like that, I actually really like the subservices as sort of test beds for some of these more boutique experiences. I think that's actually one of the best case best use best uses of these services, one of the best case models. I don't know. But I think that's kind of one of the best ways that these services can be leveraged. I think in addition to that, what Nintendo does with the NSO and the NSO expansion pass series, where it's basically sort of a catalog of like a lot of their older titles, where you can experience a lot of the NES, the SNES library, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, on up the line, um, on this monthly fee. I actually think that's a really great model. And I know and again, I think the one thing that Nintendo does or doesn't do that they really ought to give you the opportunity to buy some of these games a la carte. So you can have an either or, and they could probably double dip a little bit that way. But Nintendo does what Nintendo does, and they kind of don't care and don't. Their online stuff is kind of anyways. But I think that is a really kind of interesting proposition as well. I haven't used the Switch Online stuff a ton. I have played some older titles on it, uh, and I like that in theory, especially for it's like $20 for a year, or if you're on a plan with some friends, it's even less than that. Um, so, and especially for the expansion pass, so they're making that really accessible, and I think that's a really interesting. There was actually something, a quote that Colin brought up to David Jaffe about from Strauss Zelnick, who's he's like the Take Two executive, whatever. He's one of the big C-suite guys in the Take Two sort of sphere, and he basically has said that he doesn't find the subscription, the Game Pass type model, to be viable or feasible. And he said that he actually mentioned the fact that like more is like a catalog service or something like that. He sees as being a more viable model than the way that Game Pass is actually run now. And I think too, something that's interesting as well, and it's a bit of it's kind of another weird case, case study kind of model here, is the Apple Play, whatever they call that thing. I think it's just Apple Play. But the game subservice, where it's actually a bit of a curated service. And I think that and again, all these sort of the lines are a little blurry with all of this stuff, but I think that these subservices, even to offer sort of more curated experience, something like the Apple Play experience, I think is also really helpful and really viable. Because if we're being honest, yeah, there aren't as many like big AAA first party bangers all the time. And I'm kind of okay with that, because I think you only need like a few of those a year. And again, this is personal preference, but I think what's sometimes hard is that there's a lot of like stuff that just sort of flies under the radar and nobody really talks about it. And it'd be cool to maybe, and again, it's sort of like even that indie stuff, but like having just like saying like, we've gone through all of these like smaller, single A kind of experiences, or these indie experiences, and we've really kind of curated this collection. We think this is the creme de la creme. Or an example that was given again in that Sacred Symbols Plus episode was Shudder as a streaming service is solely it's basically on all about horror. And it seems weird that that kind of model would work, but what if we did have more of sort of these niche subscription models, or niche, I try to say niche and niche anyway, but these niche subscription services, where it's like, this is all about horror survival games, this is all about third party action adventure, this is all about whatever. And you had some of these smaller services that could, and actually Shudder has gone and done and produced some movies out of that sort of venture as well. So it's like there's a lot of really interesting things with this model that I don't think we've seen fruition of, and that's because in a lot of ways the model is still in its infancy, and it's still, I think, as Xbox tries to sort of find its identity, and as it sort of wrestles with it, we're going to see the emergence of something. I'm hopeful that there's going to be a clearer, more coherent vision for Xbox and Game Pass moving forward. So that's really it. And I think sort of, again, some of this has just been a sort of a shift in my attitude towards these. Now, granted, I do think I have questions about how this affects the psychology of the consumer. I'm not sure that this model helps with some of just the rampant overuse and sort of misuse of media in general, like the whole binging entertainment kind of stuff. I wonder how much stuff like this actually contributes to that and sort of actually flourishes on that sort of mentality. But that's neither here nor there for now. And again, the jury's out on a lot of this. It's all speculative. It's all kind of like whatever. We've got to see how this all plays out before we get into that stuff. So, like I said, a lot of this has just been though kind of like I've been my perspective here, my sort of thoughts on it have sort of been evolving since I got the sub to PS Plus Extra. And well, it's premium really. Like I locked in for like 2 years or something like that. So there's that. And I'm kind of like thinking through some of that, and that sort of changed some of the ways that I look at and do and see things. But also, even with my fairly recent exposure to Game Pass Ultimate on my laptop here, that's really kind of shifted things for me a little bit too. And so I'm experiencing some of these things, and I'm kind of understanding the appeal of them, and I'm the needle is moving a little bit. I'm still, like I said, I'm a little, maybe not antagonistic, but I'm a little suspicious. I'm a little sort of like skeptical of like how this is all going to play out. But I'm trying to sort of be a participating skeptic and not just sort of sitting from the outside and sort of saying, "Oh, this sucks. This is the worst Game Pass, best value gaming TM." I mean, I'm still going to say that because it's fun, and I like to have hot takes. I mean, I don't like to. I just have hot takes, and then yeah, I say them. Anyways, so I just think there's some interesting stuff sort of cooking right now, and again, a lot of it is just influx, and we'll see sort of how it all shakes out. Um, just sort of, want to double back and just again sort of say I did, and not like Phil Spencer listens to the breakdown or anything like that, but you know what, I really, flowers to Phil for sort of being a real stand up dude and sitting through that interview and not taking the way out, and good job to the Kind of Funny guys. Um, yeah, I don't really interact with Kind of Funny or pay too much attention to it, but one, that was a heck of a scoop, heck of an interview, and they really deserve a lot of credit there. And lastly, guys, I'm like I said, uh, there's a lot sort of going on with all this Game Pass stuff and all of these models, and I think there are a lot of questions that we have yet to sort of really wrestle with. But I think for the first time, and maybe it's just because now I'm actually experiencing it, but like I don't hate where we're at as far as like some of these models. And do I think the model has yet to really be proven? Absolutely, absolutely. But I'm cautiously optimistic, or I'm at least a participating skeptic at this point in time. All of that being said, you know what? I think this is a good place to sort of just like sort of like put a pin in it, and maybe we'll revisit some of this stuff later on as things sort of develop, as things sort of play out with the the ABK Microsoft acquisition. I know we're all exhausted, we're tired of hearing about it, but hey, there's still a lot of stuff up in the air there too. All that being said, this is it. I'm gonna close out and saying like, hey, you guys, you know what? Thanks for hanging out for a few minutes, and you know what to do. So until next time, do the things, guys. I'll talk to you later.